need to do for my Swiss roll is to prepare the tin, and I'm going to line it with baking parchment. This tin that I've got is about 33 centimetres by 24 centimetres. It doesn't have to be exactly that, just anything that's approximately those sizes. So I'm going to turn my tin over, and then I've got some baking parchment. And I'm going to cut it so it's just a bit longer than the length of the tin. Then I'm going to fold one side up about 3 centimetres, so it'll be just higher than the depth of the tin. I'm placing it on top of the tin, just slightly a little bit in from the edge, and then I'm going to fold the other side. And then I'm going to fold up one end, and the same with this end. I want it to be just slightly smaller than the base of the tin, because the inside of the tin is smaller measurement than the outside, because you've got the thickness of the metal. So that side there is a little bit too long, so I'm going to cut some of that to shorten it. So put my tin the right way up, and then when I open this out, I can cut along the fold lines . So that should fit neatly into the base of the tin, and the sides should sort of fold behind, so it's a good sort of finish to the tin. Then the oven needs to be turned on because it needs to be preheated. So if you're using an electric oven, 200 degrees centigrade, or if it's a fan oven, then 180, and if you're using a gas oven, it's gas mark 6. So I've got in a bowl 4 large eggs, and I'm going to add to that 175 grams of caster sugar. So these need to be whisked together until the mixture is really thick. So I'm using one of these tabletop mixers to do it because it's easier and quicker. If you don't have one of these and you've only got an electric hand whisk or a whisk to actually do it by hand, then what you can do is put this bowl over a pan of gently simmering water and then whisk it, and it helps it to thicken a little bit quicker with the heat. But if you've got a tabletop mixer, you don't need to do that. So I'm going to put this on maximum speed and then leave that till that's really light and frothy in colour. If you can see, as it starts off, it's quite yellow in colour from the egg yolks, and it's going to turn quite pale in colour when it's whisked. So the mixer's been going for about 5 minutes. So it's now really thick and creamy, and as the mixture falls from the whisk down onto it, it sort of holds its shape for a little bit. So actually what I'm going to do is add just a pinch of salt and whisk that in briefly. So the salt helps to bring out the flavour of the cake. So I've now got 125 grams of plain flour. You may think that as it's a cake it should be self-raising flour, but this cake has got the aeration from the eggs, so it's got the air held in the mixture, which as it goes in the hot oven, the hot air will expand and the cake will rise. So sort of having air in a cake is an alternative to a chemical raising agent like the baking powder that's added to self-raising flour. So that's my plain flour, and then I also need a couple tablespoons of hot water. So I've forgotten to take out a tablespoon measure, so here is one. I don't want the water to be boiling or it'll start to cook the eggs, but just add 2 tablespoons of hot water. And then you need to fold this in either with a metal spoon, or this is like a spatula spoon, so it's got a thin edge to it. So I'm cutting through the air, so I'm not knocking out too much of that air that we've carefully whisked into this mixture. So it's cutting down the middle and around, and then some movements around the whole side of the bowl. At this stage you need to be fairly quick with it because you don't want to overwork it. I can still see I've got some flour there that's not mixed in. Doesn't matter if it's slightly lumpy. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour this into my prepared tin. But I'm not going to pour it from a high height. I'm going to hold the bowl fairly low so that not too much air is lost from the mixture. So scrape out as much of the mixture as you can from the bowl. And I can see a few little bits of flour there that I didn't mix in properly. So I'm just going to use the tip of the spatula to mix those in. Now I don't really want to spread it out too much because that will push the air out of it. So I'm going to hold the lining paper and just tip the pan so it forms its own level. Now that needs to go into the hot oven, and it'll probably take between 12 and 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the timer on for 12 minutes, and then while that's in the oven I need to get a sheet of baking parchment ready to turn it out onto. So I'm going to put that onto my work surface and then sprinkle some caster sugar over it. So this caster sugar just helps to stop it from sticking to the paper. Okay, so that's all ready for when that comes out now. So that's my timer for 12 minutes. That is very soft still, so I'm going to put the timer on now for another 3 minutes and then I'll check it again. And you'll notice that when I had a look at it and just gave it a light touch, I closed the oven door as quickly as I could. You don't want the oven door to be open for too long or the heat in the oven will drop. So to keep it a consistent temperature, only have the door open for as short a time as possible. Otherwise, if the temperature of the oven does drop, you might find that your cake sinks. So in preparation for the cake coming out of the oven, I have just put a cutting mat underneath my sheet of baking parchment so that when I'm trimming the edges I don't damage my kitchen work surface. And the jam for the filling, I've warmed it very slightly so that it will be easier to spread when I put it onto the Swiss roll. And also having it warm means it won't cool the sponge as quickly, because when you take it out of the oven you need to roll it as quickly as you can so that it doesn't crack. So if you were to spread a cold filling on it, that would cool the sponge down and make it more likely to crack. So that's the reason for sort of warming the jam a little bit. So now it's all ready, I've just got to wait for it to finish cooking. Okay, let's have a look at this. That looks to me like it's done. When I press it lightly, it springs back. So now I need to turn it out onto that sheet of prepared baking parchment. Just pull that a little bit more onto the paper so I can peel away the lining paper from the sponge. So if I have a palette knife over the top of it, it can help to peel it away. So what I need to do now is to trim away the edges. So I'm using a long serrated blade knife, so a bread knife, to cut the edges. The edges can be a little bit crispy. Cut that off, and then I'm going to make a cut not all the way through, but just a little way from the end that's closest to me. And now I'm going to spread jam over it. So usually I use a red jam, but I thought for a change I would do this one with an apricot conserve. So as I said earlier, I've warmed this slightly, just to make it easier to spread and so it doesn't cool the cake down too much. So spread that evenly over your sponge, and then take the end of the sponge that's closest to you, and where it's cut it will help to roll it. So you need to roll, pulling away the paper as you roll. This is probably the most difficult bit about it. So now it's rolled up, I'm going to transfer it with the paper still around it. It's quite hot, so I'm just going to slide a knife under it to help lift it onto the wire rack. And then I'm going to leave that to cool.